Louisville news is bad today. Metro Council President Jim King has passed away at the age of 63. Originally rumors were running around, and I had been told this for many months that Jim King was suffering from some heart problems, and that he had actually had some sort of surgery or something middle of last year to replace a heart valve. Now, those have been rumors. I never confirmed them, but Jim apparently did everything medically under an assumed name. Did not want his medical information out there. WDRB is now reporting that his family, Debbie King, his wife, has told them that he died of cancer after a 2-year battle that began in 2012. Myeloma cancer is what they're saying he died of. Everything is speculation. Nothing's been confirmed on any of that. But it's really, really interesting. And I tell you, Jim King is somebody that I have stayed on top of for many, many years. Jim was a guy that was hard to like, and I'm no exception to that. One minute I wanted to like him, and when I thought I could find a way to like him, he would do something because of his anger or whatever to piss me off and go after me again. It all started many years ago. I had talked about this on the air before. But me and Jim King crossed paths back, I guess, around 2008, somewhere in that area. At that time, he was trying to get Katie King elected. So it'd been somewhere around that time frame to judge. And during that time, he illegally gave Katie King a ton of money that she used to buy the election. Katie, of course, is Jim King's daughter. There was no doubt that it was illegal. No one stepped up to the plate to challenge the contributions. As someone who was a candidate, as someone who had run for office, I was acutely aware at that time of what the contribution limits were and how political contributions could be used. Because Jim King did that, I felt obligated on behalf of any candidate that ever ran for office to file charges with the Kentucky Registry of Election Finance to challenge, the contributions. Jim King was somebody that did not like to be challenged or told he was wrong. At that point, Jim became angry. I didn't know Jim King then. I knew who he was. I knew of him. I knew what he was about. I knew he was on the council, all of those things. But I didn't know who Jim King was. And I found out pretty quickly. There was a lot of things that were done to me on a personal level. Going to people behind my back, media outlets trying to disparage me and my character, disparage my family. My wife felt very ill at ease and threatened by the whole situation, rightfully so. My then wife, I should say, rightfully so. It led to a lot of problems that ultimately, I think, at least aided in her choice to be divorced. For me, once I went down that road and my family was threatened, that's when I decided and went public with everything. That's when I decided to use this little old blog I had started at edspringster.com to start publicizing, questioning things, letting the world know what was going on with the real Jim King. That was what started the situation with me and Jim King. It was never personal from me. It was always reactionary to what Jim King was doing to me and what was happening to my family because of it. It wasn't a personal thing. It was just a simple question as how it started. But King is typically King. If he couldn't get what he wanted, he didn't care, legal or illegal. He didn't care if he had to stomp on your head. He didn't care about anything but getting what he wanted. And he didn't care about any means it took to get there. Now, at the same time, people are saying, well, you shouldn't be talking about this man because he died today. Well, what you don't understand is there were really two sides of Jim King. And for me, Jim King was a paradox, folks. Let me tell you, because after everything went down, After everything was completely done with the KREF, I won the case. Him and Katie got fined. It was found to be illegal. But it was fascinating because after everything got done, King had blackballed me. I was told this by many insiders that no one was allowed to advertise with me or do any business with me, and that if a business did, they would be harassed. I was told the same thing by at least two businesses here in Louisville. So a mutual friend, someone that we both knew, intervened after all this was over and asked me to meet with Jim King. I outlined all of that conversation last week, but I'll give you a brief one now. I agreed to do that, to bury the hatchet, if you will. Jim and I were supposed to meet on a one-on-one basis. It did not work that way. He brought Mary Ann Butler to what was supposed to be a private conversation, and it went from there. There were promises made. I mean, he offered me the Metro Council District 14 seat, offered me all kinds of political money, running campaigns for Democrats if I would become a Democrat again, all of that stuff. But what was so amazing throughout that conversation, I was sitting there almost in awe. And I'll tell you why. Because Jim was trying so hard, he wanted so desperately for me to like him. And yet he had so much power, he could sit there and guarantee me a Metro Council seat. That was Jim King. Jim King to me was a paradox because Jim always wanted everyone to like him, and he never understood that his actions and the people that he stepped on the way up, were going to be people that just could not just like him. I mean, you can't just like Jim King. If King wants something from you or wanted something from you, he was your best friend. But if you said no, he was your worst nightmare. I got to see both sides of King. So a lot of people think that you're disparaging this man after he died today and everything. That's not the case. But the media is going out there portraying Jim King as this great and honorable family man, dedicated public servant, all of these other things. You could say a lot of things about Jim King, but to sit here and say that there was anything honorable about a lot of the things that he did, there's no way to pull that off. There's just no way. It's very, very hard to reconcile the two sides of Jim King for people who try to. And quite honestly, Jim King couldn't reconcile himself. And that's what was really, really interesting. Todd Hollenbach released a statement. Of course, everybody today had to release a statement. John Yarmouth, Steve Beshear, Todd Hollenbach, Alice in Wonderland Grimes, Jack Conway, the usual Democrat political hacks who want to get some mileage out of it by getting their name in the paper, and on the media, acting like they really cared. But Hollenbach made one. He says that Jim King was an honorable husband and father, a great leader and public servant for the city he loved. Of course, you expect all the good things to be said about someone in this situation, but at the same token, how much of that is true? How much of that is true? If Jim King was an honorable husband and father, then why was he having so many affairs on his wife, Debbie? There's nothing honorable about that, and there's nothing questionable about bringing that to the table. If Jim was an honorable public servant who cared only for the city, why were there so many backyard deals made that were going to destroy people and leave the local developments out of it? Why were we always finding a way to benefit ourselves and not the community that we loved and served so well? There are a lot of bad things that can be put out there about Jim King, and this is not the time to do it. This is not to chastise King. I'm just really bringing it to the front to talk about it, to let people know, Jim King could be likable. Quite frankly, after that meeting with Jim King and the Metro Council seat that I was offered by him and Butler. Quite frankly, I was walked out of there just totally amazed and puzzled, trying to determine who Jim King was. I really was. It was interesting because even at the hearings, at the KREF, we had to go to Frankfurt for the hearings when it went, on my legal challenge to him. And even at the hearings, we standing outside waiting for his attorney to finish talking to the media, he walked up, shook my hand, and wanted to shoot the shit and talk for a few minutes and act like we were best buddies. I just pounded his butt, and he tried to make me out to be a lying piece of garbage. But somehow he couldn't reconcile with himself that we weren't friends. That's Jim King. He was always in search of something to make him feel better about himself. He got a lot of money, but in my opinion, he never felt good about himself. That's why he continued running around on Debbie. That's why he continued doing the things that he could. He would go make a big deal. Yeah, you're right. Puma in the chat room says his name is Backdoor Deal Jim. I agree with that. It was. He would go make a deal. He'd make a bunch of money, and while that deal was going on, he had a good friend. Once that deal was over, so what? It made him feel good for a minute, but not for a lifetime. That's what he was always seeking in every relationship, whether it was a physical relationship with a female or whether it was just anybody that he met. That was my impression of Jim King. King and I talked several times over the last few years. You don't talk about all of that stuff when you do what I do. But Jim King called me, on occasion, wanted to pass me information. Did it matter that he would be a source? No, it didn't matter. Because if it was wrong, it was ironic because King tried to take me down, hurt me professionally, personally, hurt my family, hurt me financially. I mean, he did everything he could to destroy me because I stood up to hold him accountable, and I had integrity. Yet, ironically, that same integrity that Jim hated me for holding him accountable, he would come to me with information on occasion and give me information hoping that I would hold somebody else accountable to the same standard I held him accountable to. And I did, if the information was right and I could verify the information and what these people were doing was illegal. Judy Green is a case in point. Jim brought me Judy Green and the 500 black men. He's the one that told me I needed to look into that grant because Judy did something illegal, but he wouldn't provide me with a copy of it. So, of course, I went through the open records and everything else and did due diligence to verify the information was correct. And as soon as I found out that it was illegal, I went ahead and followed through and filed the charges, as I would anybody, including Jim King. It didn't matter that he was the source. It was still wrong. You see what I mean? So it's kind of a weird relationship. I put that in the article today. You can go to LouisvillePolitics.com and you can read my article about Jim and everything today. But it was a weird relationship and a weird dynamic. I called Jim King and talked to him. I don't know. I wanted to say September, early October. I hadn't talked to him in a couple of months, but I called him right before he got sick and went down at the Metro Council in November, apparently. And when I did, I wanted to talk to him about this Glen Mary project that I'm in the middle of. I have been reporting on Glen Mary Golf Course for quite some time now. Jim King's bank and Jim King himself personally involved in it. And I called him to see if he had any comment on it. He didn't have any comment on that, refused to comment on the Glen Mary situation. But we talked for a few minutes and, nature takes its course. He was trying to make me like him. And every conversation I had with Jim, and there were quite a few over the last few years, at least 2 or 3 a year, it was always the same thing. That was Jim King. So as much as, that everybody's going to portray this guy publicly because nobody wants to tell the truth, they want to portray Jim King publicly as this hero, worthy of God worship, I guess. That's not the truth. But that also doesn't mean that he won't be missed. I've got so many phone calls today, bunch of email going through. And everybody was trying to basically pull the Wizard of Oz with me. They were saying, what a great thing. They were saying, what a great thing. Jim King was dead. They were telling me that, you know, I should be singing the Wizard of Oz song, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. And I was sitting here on the phone with a few of these people who I consider close friends, and I told them, you're pathetic. And they took a little offense to that. Why do you say that? I said, because we're supposed to be good Christian people. And to sit here and think that it's great because a family is going to suffer from the loss of their loved one, to me, is not very Christian-like. I don't hate Jim King. I've never hated Jim King. I don't have anything personal against Jim King. I've never had anything personal against Jim King. Am I glad Jim King is out of power? Most definitely. He is representative of everything that is wrong with people in power and corruption. Does that mean that I wish Jim King dead? Of course not. His family loved him. Why in the hell would you wish somebody dead? And at least my friends had the good sense to be ashamed of themselves. And that made me feel a little bit better. But, you know, it's situations like this that people are going to take both sides. So I guess at the end of the day, my prayers and condolences are with the King family. Primarily Katie King. Because Katie King has been coddled by Jim. Jim has done everything for Katie in her life. He's covered every mistake she's ever made. He's covered every debt that she's ever made. Katie will have a hard time trying to figure out the real world without Jim there to take care of everything for her. He made sure she got to be a judge. Is she going to be able to handle the real world? I don't know. You know, he apparently was in a loveless marriage with Debbie King. That's why he was out doing things with everybody else. Sources tell me him and Debbie King haven't had the same bedroom in 10 years, that she didn't want to sleep next to him. But neither one of them would leave because of the money. And to me, that's a sad existence. That it's always about the money. When you live your life for the money, then the money controls you. And that, to me, I think, is a good way to understand why Jim did what he did. His love of money was more important than his love of himself and his family. And that's what made Jim King a love-hate kind of guy. So for those of you who have been calling me all day rejoicing, be ashamed of yourselves. There is nothing to rejoice about because Jim King is dead. We're going to take a quick break and come back, and we'll discuss where do we go now. What is the order of succession? How is this going to play out? Where's the power? We'll get into all of that in just a few minutes. You're listening to the Ed Springston Show right here on the MVM Radio Network. Stay tuned.
First impressions aren't the most important thing. They're the only thing. At Ernie's Print Shop, we'll produce what you need to represent your company professionally. Right now, you can get 1,000 full-color business cards, 1,000 4x6 postcards, or a 3x5 banner for just $60. You choose. Check us out at Ernie'sPrintShop.com. Ernie's Print Shop. Over 50 years, one source, one solution. Ernie'sPrintShop.com. 502-969-8585.
Being a victim of crime is no joke, but you do have options that can help you avoid becoming a victim. I'm Ed Springston of the My View Matters radio show, and on behalf of myself and co-host Ed Martin, I urge each of you to help us fight against crime. You can do your part by calling Crime Stoppers at 582-CLUE. Since 1982, Crime Stoppers has helped get over 23,000 criminals off the street with your help. Working together, we can make a difference to take our streets back. Please call Crime Stoppers at 582-CLUE, or you can visit them online at www.582clue.com. Remember, Crime Stoppers always offers up to a $1,000 reward. Get involved and help make a positive change in your neighborhood. Thanks.
Advertisers, here's a great way to reach a quality audience. Get heard on My View Matters and make some noise in the marketplace.
Email myviewmatters at AOL.com for advertising opportunities. Make a sound investment.
And we are back, folks. Lines are open, 858-683-1326 or 502-805-0334. Don't forget, for you guys that are listening, please hit that number 1 on your dial pad, and we will get on air as soon as possible. You go into break, and you think about all of these things, and you're trying to figure out everything that's going on. And anyway, Pullman in the chat room pointed out something. Green and Shanklin were very wrong on what they did, but what King did in backroom deals makes what they did pale in comparison. And that much is actually true. And that's why it was so perplexing when King, who was doing everything he could to destroy me, and did a hell of a job, folks. I got to tell you right now, he did a hell of a job taking me down. But what he was doing was so much more than Green and Shanklin. But it was perplexing because he knew that coming to me about Judy Green, that I would do the right thing, that I would try to get accountability just as I had done with him. So in some respects, you almost want to think the guy respects you, but I know he was just using me. And that's okay. That's okay. It doesn't matter who is going to use me as long as it is the right thing to do. There's this thing called morals, values, ethics, and integrity. Okay? It's why I didn't accept the challenge when Jim and Marianne Butler tried to offer me the District 14 Metro Council seat. It's why I didn't accept, changing my name to a Democrat so that I could get all of this political money to be a fall head of a political campaign. I mean, I was set. I could be set. That's what was offered to me. I could have been set. But then I would have been part of the problem and not the solution. And I had to look at myself every day in the mirror. And that's the one thing King, I guess, couldn't do. He didn't see anything wrong with coming to me and talking about Judy Green. But he saw everything wrong with me for daring to challenge him. That had to be a miserable existence, always scheming, and he did do. I mean, he benefited millions of dollars, screwing this community, in my opinion, with some of the backdoor deals that he did. That was Jim King, but Jim King is gone. So where do we go from here? A lot of people this morning were wondering, well, who's going to be the Metro Council president and all these different things. The first thing I did this morning upon learning this was to try to figure out the order of succession. And it's very, very easy to do. It's not as complicated, but it is complicated. Basically, in the event that the council president can't do their job for whatever reason, and in this case, obviously, Jim King died, then the majority caucus leader becomes president pro tem. Since David James was elected as a Democratic caucus chair, he is the Democratic caucus leader. And since they are the majority party, then David James automatically assumes and works as the president pro tem. But here's where it gets interesting. I could not find any set of rules, any ordinance anywhere that says that specifically entails and how long that is to last. For example, since Jim King has now died in Metro Council District 10, the council will get together and choose someone to take his place until the November election. Since we have an election in November, then we will have an election for the District 10 Metro Council seat, and that seat will be filled permanently until next year in 2016 when it comes up during the normal rotation. So we're essentially going to have the Metro Council choose a person to replace Jim King just until November. In November, the voters will choose who they want to replace that seat for 1 year, and in 2016, the full 4-year term will be voted on. What's interesting here is the Metro Council presidency, because it specifically says that the majority caucus leader will become president pro tem, which simply means temporary president. But it does not specifically say exactly how long that lasts. Since the presidency of the Metro Council is a 1-year term, okay, and since David James will now become a temporary president, does this mean that the Metro Council now is going to have a special election to elect a new Metro Council president, and that creates all kinds of situations. We'll get into that in a minute. Or does the Metro Council, with the Democrats in power, say, you know what, we'll just keep the seat for sure. We'll pass an ordinance saying that David James will continue on as president until the next normal election for us, which would be next January. And if they do that, then this isn't a temporary presidency. David James will fulfill the whole term. So it's a really interesting paradox. And then, of course, you're going to have to elect a new Democrat caucus chair for the Metro Council, because David can't be both, to my knowledge. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I'll have to double-check that. So it creates all kinds of things. And what really is interesting here is this. Since David James is president pro tem now, based on our charter and the way we do things, if the Metro Council opts to have a new election for Metro Council president, in my opinion, they should, since David James is in effect a temporary president by definition. Okay? And good question, Puma. I'm working up to that. I'll get to that in just a second. Well, let's get to it now. Puma in the chat room is saying, what happened to the case against David James? For those of you who aren't familiar, David James, Michael Connell and Jim King. Jim King and David James can't stand each other. They never have, okay? Jim King felt that David James was disloyal to him because Jim King supposedly helped David James win and get on the council in the first place, all right? But Jim King also had his pet rat inside David's office. David agreed to go ahead and keep Rob Holtzman on and take him as a legislative assistant. Rob Holtzman did a lot of things that I'm not allowed to talk about because I promised I wouldn't, so I won't get into detail, but let's just say Rob Holtzman didn't turn out to be someone that you could trust or someone that was worthy of the job working for David James. So David let Rob go. Jim got pissed because Rob Holtzman was Jim's link to everything that went on in David James's office. He had control over Rob Holtzman. With that in mind, he didn't have control over Wanda Mitchell-Smith, who David James brought in to replace Rob Holtzman. So King and Michael Connell got together and they tried this dual oath crap. And it's still an ongoing case, Puma. It is still an ongoing case. It has not been decided yet. They've had two special prosecutors that I know of, and both have said they couldn't reach a decision on it. They couldn't move it forward, I guess. Essentially, since David James works at the University of Louisville as a police officer at the University of Louisville, he has to take an oath of office for that job. Once he was elected to the Metro Council, he had to take an oath of office for the Metro Council job. So Michael Connell and Jim King got together and decided that this would be a conflicting situation to have two different oaths, and you can't do that and be on the Metro Council. Okay? Yet, every attorney, think about how many attorneys, doctors, and all these other people that get elected to office, they all have a second oath as well. So it was all nothing more than a BS, a bullshit stunt to try to embarrass James and try to get him off of the council out of, sheer anger because of Jim King and him and Michael Connell getting together to do it. So this case is still ongoing. It hasn't been decided whether James is legally on the council or not. or if he can continue to serve. So isn't it ironic that Michael Connell today at 3:30 had to be the one to swear in David James as the new Metro Council President pro tem? That is funny. Michael Connell, who was openly, in my opinion, working with Jim King to oust David James, had to be the one to administer the oath. To me, that's hilarious. It really is. It really is. But back to business. So what happens now if the council decides to have another election for Metro Council President, which I think they should, and again, I don't know exactly how that's going to go yet. It's all up to them. Then we have to sit here and think about how that's going to play out. Jim King has not been in a Metro Council meeting since November. He has not participated publicly in any Metro Council event or any event that he normally would. He has not been around. And yet, the Democrats still put him up for Metro Council President, led by Marianne Butler, his number 2 person. Marianne Butler is Jim's right arm. Okay? She is what she considers to be the heir apparent to Jim King. So, the Metro Council Democrats actually elected Jim King because Marianne Butler told them that he was getting better and would return to the council soon. How do you reconcile that? I don't know. I don't know how you can sit there and put somebody up who has been too ill to do the job they were elected to do, and then give them and let them continue with the power and responsibility that goes with adding more duties as president. But that's what the Democrats did. It's laughable at best, pretty pathetic at worst. When we look at this, so they elect Jim King as council president, and then of course, King didn't make it. To me, there should be another election. But because Jim King was put up in the first election, everybody was scared because it's Jim King. Everybody was scared because it was Jim King. The Republicans didn't even bother putting up anybody against him. Not one person ran against him. The one thing Jim King didn't want to happen was David James becoming caucus chair again. Jim King is the one who orchestrated to get David James out of that position last year and let Vicki Welch and Dan Johnson take over. He wanted James gone and no power, and he succeeded. So when the council elected David James to the caucus chair, it happened for one or two reasons, in my opinion. Either Jim wasn't there to beat the heads and make the threats personally, or they wanted to tell Jim King to screw off. One of the two, but yet they still elected him president. So in my opinion, they should have a new council president election, but that opens up the Pandora's box, and here's why. Marianne Butler thinks that she's the heir apparent to Jim King. That's what I think. That's why she's with him everywhere he went, including what was supposed to be a private meeting between me and King. She was on his shoulder everywhere he went. So you have Marianne Butler, and then you have Vicki Welch, who has political connections. Vicki Welch, to me, is worthless as a council member. But because she has the Democratic political connections, she gets to keep her job. I think she's worthless. But Vicki Welch knows she's got the connections, and she probably has more power than Butler does, believe it or not. So where does that leave David James if they have a new election? Does that give us a 2, a 3, or a 4-way split on the Democrats who are running? And if that's the case, you can bet the Republicans, if they smell blood like that, they're going to finally put somebody up. They didn't have the balls to do anything when Jim King was president or when Jim King was put up for the job. They didn't have the balls to stand up and put their own nominee up. But now that Jim King is gone, they might do that in this situation. And if they do that, the Republicans will probably lock on one person. My bet is Kevin Cramer or Kelly Downard. They will lock on one of those two gentlemen, and there's 9 votes out of the gate. There's 9 votes right out of the gate. That will leave 16 remaining council members because District 10 won't be represented. And that means that you would have a split 3 or 4 ways on the Democratic side if everything goes down as I've described. So it's going to be interesting to see what the council decides. Here's what I think will happen. Again, everything is speculation at this point. But here's what I think will happen. I think the council I think the Democrats on the council are going to eat themselves up. I really, really do. But they're not going to do it publicly yet. They don't want to lose the power that they've got. And we've got elections coming up in November. I think what will happen is this. I think the council will pass some sort of an ordinance or just allow, even if they don't pass anything, the Democrats on the council have all the power. So they will just go ahead and let David stay the president for the remainder of the year in one way or another to avoid the bloodletting that will go on if they try to do a new election, which is what we should have. So I think they will try to keep it status quo and let Vicki, Marianne Butler, and a few others behind the scenes go ahead and try their power trips and get everything in control for next January. That's what I think will happen. Will it? I don't know. I'm looking at a 50-50 shot here. I believe that is what will happen. Now, as far as city business is concerned, here's where it's going to get very, very interesting. Because Jim King is involved in so many projects. Even the new VA hospital. The VA hospital, is a lot of that, I believe, was Jim King's property and things like that, where they want to put the new VA hospital. And it was a reward. It really was. The Blues, King, everybody was going to benefit from that. The only people that wanted that were the power brokers and the people who were going to benefit financially. The veterans did not want the current Veterans Hospital moved from its location on Zorn Avenue. The people that hospital serves did not want it moved at all. This is the most pressing issue as far as major spending and stuff that King would be involved in or benefit from. And that is a contentious issue that's already back up for debate. We just started talking about that again a week ago here in the city. So I think that project is going to be, I think the people fighting against the new location for the VA hospital is going to be very aggressive now. And I hope so. I really do. I am a veteran, and I spoke with tons of veterans throughout that whole debacle, and I didn't find one that wanted to move the hospital. Not one. And that is saying something. So hopefully we can get that debate started again and really force the issues here on that particular project. That's going to be interesting going forward. At the very least, as much as I hate it, even the downtown location would be better than the location they're trying to put the VA hospital at now. The neighborhood doesn't want it. The veterans doesn't want it. It's a mess, and all because of Jim King and his interference and the Blues. So we're going to see how this one works out. The second thing is Jim King was also on the Simmons College Board of Directors with Kevin Cosby. Now, as you know, we followed the Workforce Training Development Facility. We're the only ones that have been reporting on all of that. And ultimately it led to a lawsuit between Jay Morgan and Greg Fisher. But as I said in the beginning, there was, Kevin Cosby dealt in some way or another, and I'm not going to rehash all the details. You can go to LouisvillePolitics.com and look up West Side Story. There's a part 1 and a part 2, and it'll give you all the details you need. But when we look at this, Greg Fisher, Lynn Fisher, JCTC, all of these people, wanted this workforce training facility anywhere but close to the West End at 8th and Kentucky on land that sits between Simmons College and everything else. So Jim King sat with the Simmons College Board of Directors. What was the payoff there so that Jim King would work with Greg Fisher? Is that one of the things that made it appear that King and Fisher were getting along better? Did they make a deal? Is that why the workplace training facility got ignored? Why we threw $25 million out the window? On federal grants and grants that we didn't have to pay back? I don't know. That's something now that we're going to look into and try to find out. All of these things, there's a lot of dynamics at play. Millions of dollars at stake because Jim was, his hand was in everything. I mean, he never saw a dollar he didn't want and never saw a person he wouldn't stand on to get it. And at the same time, he had a serious self-esteem problem and wanted everybody to love him. It's just strange. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. The council is the immediate focus on what we're going to do for leadership. In the event that they decide to keep David James as president of the council, then the only other selection we have to worry about is who's going to become the majority caucus chair. And that one I really don't have a clue about. I would think it would be Vicki Welch to finish out this year since she just came off of it, or maybe a Marianne Butler. Who knows? They might throw Rick Blackwell in her. I don't know. That one I can't even speculate on because there's just too many dynamics at play. So that's the situation here in Louisville. What do you say about this? I mean, I don't have a clue anymore. I really don't. I had to spend a lot of years, a lot of my time on a personal level, trying to protect my family from the wrath of Jim King. And now Jim King is gone. I'm not happy that he's dead, but it's a paradox for me now, But the mission moves on. As you guys know, I had somebody call me today. Well, what are you going to do now? Jim King's gone. Honestly, folks, Jim King, if you pay attention to anything we do at Louisville Politics, and there's over 150,000 people every month that do, you understand Jim King is the most minimal part of anything that we talk about and take care of. He has been a focus for the last couple of weeks for obvious reasons, but Greg Fisher, Metro Council, the Judy Greens, the Barbara Shanklins, we are equal opportunity haters here at Louisville Politics. We are equal opportunity account holders here at Louisville Politics. We're going to hold everybody accountable. So, I kind of found it interesting because there was at least two people that actually thought that Jim King's dead, and my mission stops now because it was just funny. I can't even begin to describe to you how much I laughed when I heard that. So I thought that was pretty cool. Let's look at the effect that King had on the council. Let's look at Dan Johnson, for example. How is this going to affect Dan Johnson going forward? For many years now, sources have been telling us that Dan Johnson has a gambling problem and things like that, and that Jim King writes him checks out of his personal account to cover some of his losses so that Dan Johnson will do what King tells him to do. Now, like I said, these are sources, these are rumors. This isn't me stating unequivocally that has happened. But what if? Let's look at the situation with Dan Johnson right now. He's had some serious problems. If you have to go to Gus Goldsmith to get money, then you've got some problems. And he has apparently defaulted on thousands of dollars. Has apparently defaulted on. So that means that we have more problems, right? How is that going to affect the big picture? How is that going to affect everything? How is that going to affect the grand scheme of things? If Dan Johnson owes Gus Goldsmith all that money, if Jim King was the one bailing him out, if he doesn't get his finances in order, what is that going to do? Is this going to affect him in a long-term way? I don't know. Martina, you point out in the chat room, our work is cut out for us. Life would be so simple if King was the only problem. I totally agree. Believe it or not, King may have been the only thing keeping these politicians, these elected Democrats anyway, well, all of them elected, Democrats and Republicans, because it's all the uniparty, King may have been the only thing keeping them from eating their young. Seriously. Because King could wield the power and had the money to make or break you. If you couldn't get along and you were destroying everything and tearing everything apart, King could walk up to you and say, fix it. If you don't fix it, I don't help you get reelected. As Metro Council president, I make sure you don't get any credit. I can control your destiny. You better find a way to fix it. And you would. precarious and divisive that Jim King was, that may have been the greatest thing that he brought to the Metro Council. Whether we like what he did, whether we like the means, he may have kept it from being worse than it was. So I think that's a fair statement. I really do. It's interesting because it's amazing to me how many sources come from Metro government. You would be shocked if I told you the Metro Council members that contact me with information. It wasn't just King. A lot of them do it. And it's typically not a Democrat calling me to get me to go after a Republican. It's a Democrat wanting me to go after their fellow Democrat Metro Council members because they don't like something that happened. So, we also have another situation. You're absolutely right, Puma. Again, Denise Bentley, former councilwoman Denise Bentley, former alderwoman Denise Bentley, the dreg of society. Judy Green's daughter, Jessica, got elected to District 1 Council, and the first thing she did is bring Denise Bentley back in. Denise Bentley is a pariah, folks. She is a self-serving pariah. And now she's a legislative assistant back in City Hall who is going to try to break everybody's balls to get what she wants. That's disturbing. That's disturbing. All of these people that we've had problems with are now back in City Hall. How do we handle that? How do we deal with that? Jim King, whether you loved Jim King or hated Jim King, could keep some sort of sense of control. He could keep some sort of sense of balance. He was good at that. You got to give the man credit. Now that he's not there to help with this balance and control, even if it was self-serving for King to do so, it still could have been the reason that things weren't a lot worse. But now you don't have that center figure. Now you don't have that central person to help keep things running. How is that going to affect the big picture? That's something we have to think about. So, I wasn't planning on spending the whole hour on Jim King, but every time I decide I'm going to move on to something else, then we get a comment in the chat room, and it makes sense. We're going to discuss it. This show is all about you guys. This show is all about what we do together to move forward and make it better. With Jim King gone, with the chaos that is sure to raise its ugly head in City Hall, what happens behind the scenes has always been behind the scenes. I'll be honest with you. I really hope that now it gets so chaotic that it's no longer behind the scenes, that the whole world can see and know what I deal with every day with these people, can see and know what really goes on, can see and know the lies, the hypocrisy, the deception, the craziness that are these people in City Hall. In a desperate attempt by so many of them to use me, just like Jim King wanted to use me, to let them attack their enemies. Now that Jim King's not there to keep it all under the rug, and he was good at that. What's going to explode? Where's the next thing coming from? And that, folks, could actually be a good thing. That might force accountability that none of these people want. And it's going to start with the Metro Council making a decision on what to do with the presidency. Now, if that announcement has been made in the last 2 hours, my apologies. I didn't get a chance to get an update before the show. But as of the last thing I know, David James will be your Senate Pro Tem, which means temporary, and it's up to the Metro Council to decide what the duration of that temporary is. The one thing that I do hope is pardon me, the one thing that I do hope is that when the Metro Council selects the replacement for District 10, and it will be a Democrat. Let's face facts. It's going to be the Democratic Council, and Jim King was Democrat, so they're going to do that. But when they select the person to take Jim King's place until November at the next available election, I hope that they don't turn it into the same fiasco that they made when Deontay Hollowell got selected for a Metro Council seat. It was a nightmare. It was embarrassing, and it should have never occurred. I would hope that they have more integrity there. Unfortunately,